Good evening. Welcome to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sarver. I'm an employment law and business law attorney and host of this weekly video podcast and talk video show, Tuesday nights at 5 p.m. And I'm here tonight joined by a special guest, my colleague, Matthew Stegmeir. Matthew is the Director of Operations for a nonprofit organization called Project When. Matt, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me on, Eric. It's great to be here, and I'm excited to talk about all things that are happening in the world of workplace harassment. And I know that is a topic that is near and dear to your heart as an employment attorney as well.
Yes, it definitely is, Matt. It's something I've been addressing on behalf of employees and employers, mainly employers in recent years, but doing so for the past 22 years, hard to believe, but so it definitely is a topic that I hold and take very seriously. And I know you do as well. And I'm going to give you a more proper and thorough introduction to our audience tonight in just a little bit. But before I do, I wanted to first note that a little bit about the show for those listening for the first time, to note that in Employment Law Today is on every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And the purpose of the show is to have guests who can educate, motivate, and inspire small and mid-sized business owners out there to help them to understand and navigate the various issues involving employment law, particularly now in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and in light of what the workforce is transitioning to and changing into in a post-pandemic world. So with that and as the backdrop, our show's topic tonight, as Matthew mentioned a moment ago, is addressing workplace harassment in a post-pandemic world. And, you know, in talking about this topic with Matthew before the show, we were talking about how few people would question that COVID-19 in and of itself has had this devastating impact on our nation's employment. It has dramatically upended the workplace, and it's caused emotional stress, economic harm, a toll on employees' productivity. But there's also another widespread condition that has taken a toll on the workplace as well. And it's been around long before COVID-19, and it continues today. And that is workplace harassment, including workplace sexual harassment, discrimination, bullying, and aggression. And focusing on harassment in particular, it is arguably a pandemic within its own right, in that it costs employers and employees in terms of emotional trauma, low workplace morale, litigation, bad publicity. It can be basically a losing proposition for both employer and employee, for all involved. So with that in mind, the question we're addressing tonight is, how has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted workplace harassment? What new or novel issues have been coming up? And how can our collective focus on a new workplace environment include safety protocols and inoculation from workplace harassment? So on tonight's show, as I mentioned, I'll be speaking with Matthew Stegmeir, the Director of Operations at Project When, to discuss these pressing challenges along with possible solutions. And with that, I want to give Matthew the promised proper introduction that I mentioned a moment ago. Um, as noted, my guest tonight is Matthew Stegmeir. Matthew is Director of Operations for Project When, which is an acronym for Workplace Harassment Ends Now. Matthew's background is in organizational change management consulting, which offers him valuable insights when considering how corporations can create a more respectful work environment and a better culture for their employees. Now, Project When is a 501c3 charitable nonprofit. Their mission is to elevate awareness of workplace harassment to create a sense of urgency and a call to action for organizations to commit to proactively preventing harassment and fostering a culture of respect in the work environment. Project When seeks to help victims of harassment by providing them with helpful resources, and Project When further works with employers to create workplaces where respectful behavior is the norm. So with that, once again, Matt, really glad to have you on the show tonight. Good to see you. I also like the fireplace in the background, I must say. It's a very nice touch.
It keeps me toasty too.
Toasty and has a bit of a calming effect after a hectic Tuesday, huh? Mhm.
Definitely.
Okay, great. And so why don't we dive into the questions if we might. So Matthew, can you just tell our listeners a bit more about yourself, including the nature of your work with Project When?
Sure. So I won't spend too much time talking about myself because maybe I'm just kind of a humble person. I think myself is kind of boring. But what we're doing and creating at Project One, hopefully you'll see through the course of talking with me, is something we're really excited about and passionate about. And Project When, as you mentioned, is a 501c3 charitable nonprofit. The When is WHEN. That's an acronym. It stands for Workplace Harassment Ends Now. And I'm the director of operations for the nonprofit. So my background, as you said during the introduction, is through organizational change management. This entire workplace harassment and creating respectful work environments kind of space or industry is new to me. So as I network with and speak with people in the field like yourself as a service provider who's an expert in this, I'm learning something new every day. And while it's a new area for me, it's something that we do to help. Our focus is really to help victims of workplace harassment. And you mentioned sexual harassment. That's usually the one that you hear in the news a lot. And I think especially for your listeners in New York City and the greater New York area, you flip on the news, what are you going to see? Stuff with the governor and sexual harassment these days. So it's always a hot topic. We also focus on helping employers, the companies where people work, create a more respectful work environment. And that it's really at that intersection where Project When is rooted and where we're focused. So some of our goals and what I help accomplish through the day-to-day operations is raising awareness for this issue, working with companies to create a more respectful and productive workplace for everyone, eliminating the stigma and fear of retribution for people to speak up for themselves. And I think importantly for others, if you see something happen to someone at your company and you're a bystander, I think bystanders have a super important role in all this, and being able to speak up and be an ally for people who are dealing with this and going through an incident of harassment. So bringing about awareness for what bystanders can do and educating people on how they play into it. And then really increasing the awareness of the severity of it, because we know it's an issue. A lot of times it's a focus on sexual harassment, but there's all different kinds of forms of workplace harassment and discrimination, physical harassment, quid pro quo harassment, microaggressions, bullying, job shaming, verbal threats, derogatory comments, exclusionary behavior. There's a lot of offensive conduct that goes on in our corporations and work environments these days, and that's what we're really working hard to help people put an end to that and move forward from that and really take a proactive approach. I think a lot of times you hear companies in the news for sexual harassment or someone who's famous, and it's always like a punitive thing. Okay, this happened, what are we doing in response to that? And our approach is more of, let's take a holistic look at your organization and think through how we can change our culture and change our processes in order to maybe minimize some of those things and mitigate some of those things from bubbling to the surface, so we don't even get to that point.
Yeah, and really good points there about what your project, what you do and what your focus is, that you brought up. And it's some things came to mind, if I may, just my observations, and just to elaborate on them, as well as my experience as an employment law attorney in this realm. I think it's great, Matthew, that Project When focuses on both the employer and the employee. I've seen so often, I think in our society, we get down to this like either or, and two polarized sides. Which side of the issue you're on? Are you in favor of, this side or that side? And so I know of many nonprofits that work exclusively with the employees, the plaintiffs, the victims of discrimination or harassment. Really, both can be combined. But to hear that you work with employers and employees, right? That you're helping employers to understand the severity of the situation, to be aware of it, and to create a different culture. That's really something. And I also think it's great that you have the proactive as well, that approach, rather than just, hey, let's punish after the fact. And I can relate to that in terms of helping my company clients with their proactivity, And you had a point I think you're about to make, so I want to turn the space over to you since you're my guest. Anything of that was jumped out at you there, or?
I'm sorry, what?
Oh, I'm sorry. I just I thought you were about to make a point, and that's something I said. Was there something you were about to jump in with?
No, there wasn't. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
okay. There's been a blip in the screen. I think it
Oh.
froze for a split second, so I think I thought it was your I misread your description. But I do think it's great that you work on eliminating the stigma behind, and that you also pointed out to our listeners tonight that there are, to your point, there are a lot of forms of workplace harassment and workplace aggression. And there's microaggressions, there's bullying, and some of these might be outlawed by federal statutes, some by city or municipal or state laws, and some might not in and of themselves be illegal, but might lead to the type of hostile work environment that then feeds into harassment that's unlawful. So great to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, and I think what you said, Eric. As an organization, as an employer, we always want to stay compliant. We want to do what's required of us by the law and what, at least on the federal level, the EEOC is going to enforce. But it goes deeper than that. I think in many cases, being compliant with the law is really doing the bare minimum. And I think there's a lot more employers can do. And I know we'll get into this throughout the course of our discussion, but as companies become a more welcoming and inclusive place where you can really bring your true self to work, I think that's when organizations really thrive. And when people are faced with these issues of bullying, or if their direct supervisor is harassing them, or if there's some type of inappropriate comments or behavior touching where people are uncomfortable, you really have your guard up when you're at work, and you're not focused on your work task and why you were hired. And I think that is in many ways something that organizations need to keep in mind when they look at, okay, if there's a required training for harassment, sexual harassment or physical harassment, it's like, oh, do we really need to do this? Or maybe we'll just do it and, everyone goes through the course and we call it a day and we don't worry about it again until next year. If you only focus on the bare minimum, you're going to get bare minimum results. So it's really important to take a holistic look and really look at this with an open mind.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very true. I think the holistic approach to, I think all things that involve human interaction and relationships, and the workplace is a place for relationships. It's a relationship between the managers and the employees. You have subordinates and higher ups, and then you also have coworkers who are lateral, and it's just a matter of understanding the human dynamics involved. And I'm glad you also pointed out just the fact that this is something that has some deep repercussions on the adverse side, and it's a pretty big issue. And so I agree with you, Matthew, that the bare minimum in anything, right, gets the bare minimum result. And so so I'd like to hear more from you after the commercial break about ways in which the pandemic may have impacted sexual harassment in the workplace, and also what Project When does specifically to help employers to create this culture. But we need to take a commercial break. So folks, you're here tonight listening to or watching Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sarver, employment law, business law attorney at the law office of Eric M. Sarver. I'm here tonight with my guest, Matthew Stegmeir, Director of Operations at Project When. So stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you interested in having a better relationship with yourself, others, and God? Greetings. I'm your host, Dr. George Andow, for the show A Journey Through into Awareness. On my show, we journey into the awareness that the mind of God is the true seat of our personal consciousness. We join together each Monday at 7 p.m., so tune in on Talk Radio NYC. Did you know that nearly 1 in 5 adults in the U.S. battles mental illness? Hi, my name is Albert Daba. I'm the host of the show Extra Innings. Extra Innings, I discuss the topics of wellness, mental health, and the experience of surviving multiple suicides within my family. Listen live every Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern to Extra Innings for discussions with sports figures, artists, mental health professionals, and many others. That's Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Graham Dobbin. Join me every Thursday evening for the Mind Behind Leadership here on talkradio.nyc. We speak to people from business, sport, military, and politics, all around what makes a great leader. The personal experiences of what's worked and, maybe more importantly, what hasn't worked. So, that's 7 o'clock every Thursday evening, the Mind Behind Leadership here on talkradio.nyc. Listen to real stories of real leaders.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Good evening. Welcome back to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sarver. We're here live tonight on talkradio.nyc, and I'm joined by my guest, Matthew Stegmeir, Director of Operations for Project WHEN, which is an acronym for Workplace Harassment Ends Now. So Matthew, again, great to have you on the show.
Likewise, it's really great to be here and talking with you today, Eric.
Yeah, I think it's a good conversation. And I think it's also an important conversation that I wish more people would be having. You know, we, in the employment law realm, whether it's Project WHEN or HR consultants or attorneys, are talking about this a lot. And I think, as you mentioned, Governor Cuomo and the allegations that have surfaced, that this is an issue that, you know, it doesn't know boundaries of just private organizations. It impacts people in nonprofit, in the government, the highest levels. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yes, it's a big challenge today, and I think, as you know, from someone who deals with this up close and personally with your corporate clients, it's not going away. So that's why we exist, to try to lead us, you know, culturally as corporations and employers into the future, to where at least this can be minimized somewhat. And you know, if we can impact one organization, that's, you know, affecting all of their employees, and that's a big win. So
yes, sounds like it to me. So let me ask you another question, Matt. In terms of the pandemic that we've all been living with for over a year now, I'm wondering, in what ways have you seen the COVID-19 pandemic impact sexual harassment in the workplace?
Yeah, Eric, that's a really good question. I think initially when you talk about the pandemic and COVID and how that affects the workplace, at least my thinking is you automatically go to people working from home. And, you know, that is one of the biggest changes, besides, you know, people being a little bit more spaced out and, you know, wearing masks. And I think one, it's important to keep in mind that not everyone is working from home. There are lots of businesses that it was business as usual, or it's an added stress of people, you know, having to deal with craziness in the world, and like if you're working at a grocery, for instance, or you have a car shop, you don't shut down. It gets tougher. So I think for many people, the commonality, regardless of where you were, is it's a stressful situation to be in. And I think about we were talking about our personal family lives, having young kids and toddlers, and for those of us who are working from home, it's an added stressor. And I think that is, anytime you're in a stressful situation, it's tough to maintain your composure. And I think if anything, in terms of what's happening with harassment cases, we've heard from organizations and from individuals that there have been more people texting because they're not in person, and it might be mean. There people on video calls, maybe being a little bit impolite, or worse. I think for me, one of the things that comes to mind that might be why things have changed is, when you're working from home, it's a little bit more of a casual environment. You have your guard down a little bit. You're at home. People might not be as formal in their attire even. So just naturally, your mind is thinking, okay, I'm a little more casual. So I think from people being in that environment for a year, they're, and I think you might have even mentioned it, Eric, is, like the flirtation through Zoom calls, where something like that is inappropriate. And for me, I even think about when this is all over and people start to go back to the office. And of course, there's discussions of, are we going to stay virtual and people be remote, or people be back in the office? But at some point, there will be some influx of people back into the workplace. And I think that is going to be an interesting time. And I would imagine there's going to be an uptick in harassment cases, because people are kind of out of sorts, and they're used to being in a more casual environment. And you get back to the office and it's like, okay, you need to make sure to be professional again. So I think that will be an interesting challenge for organizations moving forward.
Absolutely, Matthew. I really think so too. I'm glad you reminded our listeners tonight that while many people have been going virtual, working remotely in certain professions, there are a lot of employers out there and a lot of jobs that are structured such that you cannot work remotely, right? If you're a restaurant, and even if you're curbside pickup or partial capacity, limited capacity, if you're, as you mentioned, a good example, a mechanic, I have clients that are dry cleaners, clients that are in restaurants, clients that are car washes, and so they don't work remotely. It doesn't work, but you can't wash your car remotely. So it's really important to note that. And as I mentioned, I defend companies who are in a pickle and they have an employment discrimination case pending, but I also try to help my clients to practically, much like you mentioned Project Wen does, and practically follow these laws, because if they know what the law can mean for them, if they know what happened if they break certain federal, state, and city laws around discrimination and harassment, they understand the damages and the negative press and exposure. It's really something to motivate them to seek help. So I see us sort of as allies, right? I see that I help companies in a lot of ways to comply with, to know the law and comply with it. You help them to build a culture in their workplace. And so just glad that you mentioned that point about the non-remote workers. And the last thing I just wanted to comment on is your point about stress, that we're all under more stress. And you add the additional stress to the fact that people are in their home environments and maybe more casually dressed, they're in their bedroom perhaps, or their like son's lit room, or whatever the case may be. They're just some are not as geared towards like, I'm in the conference room in the middle of the city wearing a suit and tie. So
Yes.
Important points, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's, you look at where organizations are today and starting to at least plan out how we're going to be when we get back to normal, or when things kind of subside with the pandemic. And I think it's really a perfect time for organizations to really take a holistic look at how their workplace operates, and really go through a structured process to address systemic harassment before it occurs. And one of the things that we offer is an organizational certification program that we just launched for companies who are really excited and really want to make this a priority moving forward, where they can be certified by our organization as an organization that's really trying to do things the right way and create a welcoming culture for everyone.
Right. That certification program sounds like a really good thing to have in place, and I'm curious. It kind of segues, Matt, into another question I have that maybe we could talk a bit about. Can you tell us a bit about how Project When helps businesses to recognize and remedy signs of workplace harassment?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, Eric. And I think it's helpful to. I have not described exactly what we do and what we don't do. And one of the things, sometimes it's helpful to talk about what we don't do. Project When, we're not employment law attorneys. We're not, HR consultants or diversity and inclusion consultants. Our goal is to raise awareness for this issue and help companies move forward and help victims. And in many ways, it's helping organizations and victims find the resources that can help them through their particular challenge. Now, one of the things that we will do for organizations, I mentioned our certification program. We're also developing a individual certification credential with Human Resources Certificate Institute, the HRCI, that will be launching soon. And it's great for people who are service providers in the area or internal practitioners who are leading an organization internally. But one of the things that we do for companies is to host a Project When roundtable, where we can bring your internal leadership team together and talk in a very comfortable virtual setting or in person at some point, and talk through what are the issues that we need to resolve. Where are our blind spots as an organization? What are the things we need to focus on? Where have we struggled? What might we do to take the next step to move forward and be a better place for our employees to work? And it's really just kickstarting that dialogue and giving them a path forward with some ideas of things that they can do as an organization, and then point them to the right direction of the service providers who might be able to help them with that.
Interesting, the way you broke it down into what you do and don't do. And this course, the certification, is that something that companies could do on a recurring basis, or is it a short type of course, like a one-shot deal, or?
That's a great question. So our organizational certification is your organization would go through this process. It takes approximately 3 months based on all the steps involved. But the first thing we would do would be to have a company launch a survey that we would conduct for all of their employees, asking about what have they seen in terms of harassment, what are some of the challenges they're facing, what does it feel like to work at the company, the culture, things of that nature, to give us a flavor for what it's like to be an employee there and what some of the issues are. Then our team will review that survey and then come back with and then also review some of their documents and processes about, do they have a formal guide about anti-harassment, what's expected of employees, how do we review cases as they come in and are reported internally. And then we'll come back to the company with a set of recommendations that we think they need to implement. And then it'll be a biannual process where they would repeat the survey to maintain their certification as an anti-harassment certified organization by Project When.
Well, it sounds very thorough, systematic, and detailed. It's something really for companies to consider strongly and to explore. And I want to talk more with you about this and other topics as well. But as you might guess, we've taken a commercial break for a support from our sponsors. So folks, you're listening to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sarver, employment law, business law attorney. I'm here with my special guest tonight, Matthew Stegmeir, Director of Operations for Project When. We're discussing workplace harassment and ways to eradicate it. So stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Do you run or are ready to open your own business? Hi, I'm Jeremiah Fox. I've been operating and opening small business for the last 25 years, and I'm the host of the new show, The Entrepreneurial Web. Tune in every Friday at noon Eastern Time for insights and stories on the nuances of running small business right here on Fridays at noon, talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I am Joseph Franklin McElroy, host of the new podcast, Wise Content Creates Wealth. It airs on talkradio.nyc every Friday afternoon from 1 p.m. to 2. They say content is king. Well, wise content rules the world. Every episode features tools and tips for content marketing and business people telling the wise content stories of that success. Tune in every Friday from 1 p.m. to 2 on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sarver. I'm here tonight with Matthew Stegmeir, Director of Operations for Project WEN, and we're talking about eradicating workplace harassment, particularly in a post-pandemic world. And so we've covered some really good points tonight for those that might be joining us, a little recap, discussing some of the causes of workplace harassment, it's discussing the stigma involved and how to raise awareness around that. We talked about some of the factors of the pandemic that might be exacerbating workplace harassment, including the added stress and also the combined sort of meshing of boundaries and lack of clear-cut professional boundaries when people are working from home and often they're in a more casual dress, in a more casual environment. So I think that's really good, all good points to make. And really appreciate, Matthew, you're sharing with us Project WEN's certification program and process. So I want to thank you for sharing all of that so far.
Definitely. Thanks, Eric.
Sure thing. I was wondering if we can perhaps discuss some other aspects of recognizing and remedying, workplace harassment. Mainly, perhaps we can talk a little bit about some of the benefits, like you mentioned earlier, benefits to businesses in doing the work, right, to really root out harassment. Like what's sort of like what's in it for them in a selfish kind of way.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're a business owner, it's always what's in it for me. I mean, you need to make sure, I think from a harassment standpoint and workplace discrimination, one, you want to make sure you're in compliance with the law. So you're protected if something happens, or you're at least, on the right track. But I think, to take things the next step and take it a little bit further, the more healthy and welcoming and I think inclusive your workplace is, if you are an employer, the better off you're going to be. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, we alluded to it, but if you're an employee and you're dealing with being harassed at work or bullied, or you're uncomfortable being yourself and letting your true colors show, so to speak, you're going to be guarded. You're not going to be as productive because you're focused on protecting yourself from something bad happening. Whereas if you know there are allies in the workplace, if you know the organization welcomes you with who you are, and you know that it's an inclusive place, you're going to be more comfortable being yourself, and you're not going to have to worry about some of those things. And I think even as an organization, things happen, and it's important to have the right policies and procedures in place. And I think that's something you help your clients with, Eric, getting people prepared for if something does happen, how do we handle this so you're not caught off guard. And it's really important to have a plan for these types of things.
I agree with you 100%, Matthew, on this. It kind of brings you back to another theme that I try to impart to my clients, who are business owners in all different industries and all sizes, in that a happy employee makes for a more productive workplace, and more productivity. I mean, what employer doesn't want their employees to be more productive? If you had the question, would you rather your employees be drained, right, morale shot, and low productivity, and possibly high turnover, or would you want your employees to be content, satisfied, high productivity, higher morale, or at least a better chance of that happening, right? Which would you choose? They would say the latter in a heartbeat. But I think often people, when they look at and say employment law, what's prohibited, sexual harassment, discrimination, a lot of clients ask me, okay, what do I have to do to get in compliance? And I tell them about, you have to have certain complaint procedures in place. Your employee handbook should have information about where an employee can go if they're being harassed, and you should have channels in place to investigate complaints of discrimination or workplace bullying or harassment, have clear policies. And I help my clients set those up. But I always think about the broader theme that if you do more, and you mentioned earlier, if you do more than the minimum, then you will ultimately have more content employees, and being their true selves. It's like what you hire them for. You hire people to bring their experience or knowledge, their passion to whatever they're doing. And so it's good for business owners to remember that you need to foster that in a very inclusive way.
Yeah, and it's almost like car insurance if you think about it. Like you can drive uninsured and maybe you don't get in an accident and everything's fine, but if you don't have the policies and procedures, and you're not looking at your organization holistically and seeing, what can we do to improve things, there's a better chance things are going to bubble to the surface. And even to take it a step beyond that, you're better off looking at this and trying to improve your corporate culture and make people more welcome and allow them to be themselves, and to root out some of these things as they pop up and address it in the moment and have those difficult conversations, because that's going to lead you to a better place as a business, and your people are going to be healthier physically and mentally, and they're going to do a better job. And I think with that, you have kind of the hidden factor of employee loyalty. If employees know that you have their back and you're creating a great workplace for them, there's an increased chance that they're going to want to stay for you, and they're going to want to work hard, and it's a place they're going to want to be. So it really behooves organizations to focus on making your work culture one that's healthy and inclusive.
Yep. No, I think that's a really good point to make, Matthew. I think that, and it really is a type of karma, right? Because what you put out in your workplace gets reflected and mirrored back to you so often. Maybe not in an exact tit for tat way, but if the general vibe that employees have is that their workplace is just barely doing what they have to keep people from breaking the law, it doesn't always foster a safe, inclusive environment. And so I think it's a really good point that you're making. Also, I'm curious to hear about any interesting service providers that Project When has found they work most readily hand in hand with.
Well, I think it really depends on the organizations approaching us and what challenges they're having. Who we can point them in the direction of, and obviously, we focus more than just the employers. We focus on the victim side. So we have a lot of resources on our website that we've developed that spell out what you can do if you've been harassed at work. How do you report an incident of workplace harassment? What do you do if you're a bystander and you observe this? Even breaking it down by each state that people work in the United States. We've come up with resources on the website about what each different type of harassment is that the EEOC tracks. So it's not just sexual harassment, it's not just physical harassment. There's age discrimination, there's sex-based harassment. There's so many different kinds of things that the employees are challenged with. So we always try to, if someone approaches us and they need help, we always try to connect them with someone that we can help, depending on what they're facing, as either a victim or as an organization that's trying to improve or navigate an issue.
That's interesting to know, and I think it's a good point you raised, that there are different resources available for whether you're on the employee side or the employer, that Project When can connect people with. So if we have listeners tonight at home who are, say, employees of companies, maybe they don't own their own business, maybe they're working somewhere, that they can go to your website, they can reach out to Project When and get help. And I think it's important to note that while there may be different resources for each party here, the employer and the employee, that some of the underlying issues that come out, there's like a commonality and common theme here around just promoting an environment and a culture of respect in the workplace. And, I'm also glad you mentioned, we talk about workplace harassment. When I introduced the topic, I did mention there are many kinds. There's workplace bullying, right? There's microaggressions, there race-based discrimination in a hostile work environment. There's all kinds of ways that people can lash out. And I think it's so important for the company to create a culture where the employees know that this is not the norm. Because I find often that, just my observations here, very often the tone gets set from the top down. And so if you look at companies where if the people in charge are insensitive to, unaware of, or even partaking in some kind of, say, bullying or harassing environment, right, it's going to trickle down and it's going to be like sort of the unstated rule of the land, that this is how the lay of the land is. Yeah. That's something you found with your interactions with employers over the years?
It is. And, I know we'll shift gears here in a minute, but I'd love to talk about some of the industries we've seen where there's commonalities and there's a big challenge of harassment. But one of them is the alcohol industry and the alcohol and beverage industry. And we're actually putting on an event, a roundtable discussion for people in that industry to kind of talk through what their challenges are and what they're seeing. But from one of the people who was sponsoring the event, they mentioned to us a lot of these breweries are family owned. Mm-hmm. And they kind of use that as a crutch, like, oh, we're a family-owned business. That's just kind of the way we are. And I think it's, kind of an excuse to maybe not look at things like a real business, or like, oh, we can let that slide because it's, and that's unacceptable, obviously. And, that's not the way to conduct business. So.
Yeah, very true. We could talk more about that in a moment because I've seen that dynamic as well, and I'd love to explore that a bit. But before we do, we have to take another commercial break. So I'm Eric Sarver, host of Employment Law Today, here on talkradio.nyc, Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Tonight, my guest is Matthew Stegmeir from Project When. So stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Are you a small business trying to navigate the COVID-19 related employment laws? Hello, I'm Eric Sarver, employment law business law attorney and host of the new radio show Employment Law Today. On my show, we'll have guests to discuss the common employment law challenges business owners are facing during these trying times. Tune in on Tuesday evenings from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
Franklin McElroy, host of the new podcast, Gateway to the Smokies. It airs on talkradio.nyc every Tuesday night from 6 p.m. to 7. Every episode is dedicated to memorable experiences in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and surrounding areas. This show features experts and locals who will expound upon the richness of culture, history, and adventure that awaits you in the Smokies. Tune in every Tuesday from 6 p.m. to 7 on talkradio.nyc.
Do you love or are you intrigued about New York City and its neighborhoods? I'm Jeff Goodman, host of Rediscovering New York, a weekly show that showcases New York's history and its extraordinary neighborhoods. Every Tuesday live at 7 p.m., we focus on a particular neighborhood and explore its history, its vibe, its feel, and its energy. Tune in live every Tuesday at 7 p.m. on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sarver. Joining me tonight is my guest, Matthew Stegmeir, Director of Operations for Project WHEN, which stands for Workplace Harassment Ends Now. And we've been discussing, Matthew and I have been discussing harassment in the workplace, including but not limited to, as we say in legal speak, sexual harassment, but also workplace bullying, microaggressions, implicit bias, and you know, Matthew, it's interesting, if I may, just some observations, if I may chime in here with them. When we started the show off, I said that I think that harassment in the workplace can arguably be equated to a pandemic in its own right. I mean, it's been around, it's a worldwide problem, it's an international problem. It is all encompassing in some places. When it strikes, it can be very hard to eradicate. And in my opinion, I think it's contagious in that if a company has a few bad actors who are fostering or promoting or even engaging in harassment, then it tends to spread and people get the message this is okay. So I like how you talked about how Project WHEN can recognize that factor. And you talked a few times about encouraging bystanders to step in. So I'm wondering, can you talk more about how Project WHEN might train bystanders to sort of what their role is to stand up to workplace harassment?
Yeah, that's a great question, Eric. And I'll coach this maybe with a little legal speak of my own that I'm not a specialist in this particular area. Again, my role at Project WHEN is to kind of run the day-to-day operations, but the aspect of what bystanders can do, it is really important. And I think it is something in our individual certificate course that we're developing with the HRCI. It's a 5-course module, and it'll take people through recognizing what workplace harassment is, all the different types of harassment. And then one component of one of the courses gets into detail about what bystanders can do, because it's really, if there's someone in your workplace that's getting harassed and you see it, you have a super important role. It's like you've been placed in this situation. It's uncomfortable for you, but I think it's almost like a challenge for you to be a better person. What are we going to do about this? We saw this, and that's easier said than done, because You think about like the Cuomo situation, for instance. I saw the woman, I think the first woman who came out with the allegation saying that while, his actions and how he assaulted me what hurt the most was the people who knew this was going on. They didn't do anything. And it sometimes it's tough when someone who's doing the harassing or the discrimination is at the top of the organization. Like, how do you deal with that? And that's something that is covered, in our training material. But as a bystander, the person who this is happening to, they're not helpless, but I think in many instances they feel helpless. It's usually a power thing. It's someone above them. They feel, many times it happens to women, and you think of, someone, if it's a single mother, for instance, and she's faced with the decision of, okay, do I, speak up and risk losing my job? And then I'm out on the street and I've got to, feed my kids. I don't know how the heck I'm going to do that. Or do I just put up with it? And that's where bystanders have a lot of power in and of themselves to support that person, to acknowledge that it's happening, and hopefully in an organization where this is going on, to have some type of avenue to report that harassment that they've witnessed.
As an employment law attorney, over the years, I've represented employees who were bystanders who spoke out. And the goal, of course, is to protect them from retaliation that's unlawful. And if there is some, of course, to stand up for it, against it, because it's against the law. I think that as from the employer side, so important, I believe it is crucial to educate employers that they are not, if they retaliate, take an adverse action against someone who opposes harassment in the workplace, even if the person who's opposing it is not the victim of the harassment themselves, that person who's opposing and objecting to harassment still has federally protected rights under employment discrimination laws and state and city laws as well, where they can sue the company. I mean, I've had clients over the years who were defending where they took action against, say, a white, heterosexual, young, able-bodied male who stood up for an African-American woman who was lesbian and being harassed in the workplace. And, he was terminated and he was fired and he sued the company and won. This was a while back because of the unlawful retaliation provision. And the company didn't even seem to realize that a man who was white and heterosexual and able-bodied and in his 30s would have a claim of discrimination and retaliation against them. But so I think it's worth pointing that out, as I think I heard you talk about maybe some other motivations that can inspire bystanders, like to know you're protected by the law.
Yeah, and companies aren't permitted under the law to escalate things in that situation. So if you do speak up, I mean, you're protected. But I think also the flip side of that is you are protected, but it's still a tough situation if you are terminated for that, and you're going to have to pursue that legally. And what type of settlement do you get? So that's why it's an important conversation for us to be having today, and for companies to be having internally, about how do we handle these situations, because it's in theory and in actuality, as you gave with the example, you're protected, but there can still be fallout from that, which is why we want to transform corporate cultures to where people feel free to speak up, and hopefully it's a more welcoming place where some of this stuff doesn't even happen.
Absolutely, Matthew. And that's another point too, right? I hear this from employers a lot. There's employees as well. There's what the law says, and there's a quote unquote real world of fear of retribution, that even if the law says I'm protected, don't want to have to go through a lawsuit. And this has been a great conversation, really just getting into all the actions that your company, your nonprofit does, identifying some of the COVID-related factors that can exacerbate harassment, and then ways that we can work to eradicate this issue. We've got about 3 minutes left before we need to end for tonight's show. I wish we could talk another hour because it's been such a great conversation. Yeah. But I want to give you a couple minutes. Maybe you could take 2 minutes to talk about any upcoming projects, webinars, or just how people can reach you if they have a question.
Yes, definitely. So, and thank you for that, Eric. I really appreciate it. So again, Project One is a 501c3 charitable nonprofit. So we get our funding from doing events or from donations from individuals or from corporations. So I mentioned one of the things we do to kind of help organizations and change that dialogue is to host the Project One roundtable, where we can meet internally with your organization, kickstart that dialogue about what we need to do to improve things. That's also something that service providers, if you're in this space, if you're a big employment law firm, for instance, you might consider sponsoring a roundtable to bring together some potential clients. And we customize these events based on the attendees and what happens. And what their challenges are. So even as large employers, like a tech firm, for instance, you might want to put something on for people in your industry to network and talk through what challenges they're facing. And that's something we can do to help out. And so we're actually doing one. We have a brewery in Kansas City, Crane Brewing Company. They're actually making a Project One beer for us this month, which is really cool. And they're going to donate some of the proceeds from that to us. So there's information on our website, project1.org. But we're hosting a roundtable discussion with folks from the alcohol industry, talking about what their challenges are, what they've seen in the space, and what companies can do better to create better, more respectful working environments in the industry. And that information that's open to the public. That event's happening next Thursday night, and that information's on our website at project1.org.
Wonderful. Matthew, thank you so much. It was a pleasure having you on the show tonight. I'm Eric Sarver, host of Employment Law Today. Matthew Stegmeir, everyone from project1.org. If you like the show, tune in Tuesdays, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. on Talk Radio NYC, and have a wonderful evening and a great rest of the week. Matthew, thank you once again.
Thank you, Eric.
Yep. Have a good night.